September 27, 1821. Mexico will officially declare independence from Spain, ending the revolution that has lasted over a decade, destroying what was once the crown jewel of the Spanish Empire. Though for the newly independent country of Mexico, their troubles will be far from over, as political instability and rebellions will plague the country, a scene which outsiders, both native and European, wish to take advantage of. Though their biggest threat will arise from another formal colonial nation, the 45-year-old United States of America, whose politicians and colonists alike have long been eyeing the vast northern territories, which are both lightly populated and rich in natural resources. As American settlers continue to push west, by 1834 it is estimated that 3/4 of all people living in Texas are Anglo-Americans, who will bring with them their racial prejudices, slavery, and Protestantism, setting the stage for what will soon become the Texas Rebellion, fostering the rise of the Republic of Texas and setting the stage for even larger war, one that will redefine both the new Mexican Republic and the rising power of the United States. Following the signing of the Treaty of Cordoba, Mexico would crown its first emperor on July 21, 1822, becoming Agustin I, though his reign would be short-lived. Less than a year later, rebels would capture vital parts of the country. By the end of March, he would abdicate. In his place, the rebels would establish an interim government, which would oversee the creation of a new constitution in 1824 and the establishment of Mexico as a federated republic. The following week, Guadalupe Victoria would be elected president of the newly created Mexican Republic. Under the Federalist system, Mexico would be comprised of 19 states and 5 territories. Their northern frontiers would be sparsely populated, mainly inhabited by natives, which would frequently raid deep into Mexican territory, plundering and destroying the rural settlements. The government had little options to quell this threat. Because of the nearly 11-year independence war, the country was bankrupt. In a hope that settlement would help protect against further raids while also providing the state with an influx of money, Mexican Congress would pass the General Colonization Law, encouraging foreign immigration to Texas and Mexico's other sparsely populated northern territories. In 1819, the United States would face its first widespread financial crisis, as banks would begin foreclosing on farms and business properties. As a result, when Mexico changed its colonization laws allowing for foreign settlement, the prospect was appealing to many Americans. The first group of Anglo-American colonists under the leadership of Stephen F. Austin would settle along the Brazos River, establishing his headquarters at San Felipe de Austin. Over the next several years, approximately 3,400 land grant applications were submitted, as 23 other empresarios would establish colonies within Texas. Of the empresarios, only one would settle Mexicans, the rest being foreign immigrants mostly made up of Anglo-Americans, which would bring with them their slaves as well as Protestantism, which was specifically outlawed in Mexico. Though for the new settlers, the native tribes would pose a major threat, mainly from the Comanche to the north, who would massacre the town of Gonzales in 1826, as well as the Corancaway and Lipan Apache from the south, who would launch constant raids against the growing settlements. As a result, Mexican authorities would encourage the formation of local militias. Austin would be granted the rank of lieutenant colonel of the militia and given authority over all justice in the region. To help prevent further raids, he would form the Ranger Company, a small group of capable frontiersmen who would serve as the precursors to the famed Texas Rangers. In 1825, Austin would endorse a brutal campaign against the Corancaway, almost annihilating the tribe. The few Mexican troops in the region would assist the settlers whenever possible, often providing armaments to the militias and supplying a small cannon to the rebuilt town of Gonzales. Though despite their cooperation, tensions in Texas are beginning to rise, as the tensions between the new Anglo settlers and their Mexican overlords are quickly becoming evident. December 21st, 1826. Empresario Hayden Edwards would declare his colony, located near Nacogdoches, as the Independent Republic of Fredonia, marking the first attempt by Texan settlers to secede from Mexico. Though Edwards' rebellion would be impetuous, without the support of his fellow colonists, his force would number less than 50 men. The same day, 110 Mexican soldiers would depart from San Antonio de Béjar, later being reinforced by 250 Texan militia from Austin's colony. With little option left, Edwards would flee to the United States, ending the revolt just over a month after it had begun. Despite most of the other empresarios in Texas renouncing all support for Edwards' actions, tensions would continue to rise. In 1828, Mexican Congress, realizing the problems now festering in Texas and fearing a possible annexation by the United States, would attempt to tighten their control while discouraging further immigration. Passing slave reforms and the eventual banning of the practice of slavery in 1829, rescinding the property tax law that had exempted new immigrants, increasing tariffs on all goods entering Mexico from the United States, while also banning further immigration. Many of these acts, like the banning of slavery, would be circumvented on technicalities or entirely ignored by the Anglo-American settlers. In his colony, Austin would attempt to suppress the news of Mexico's ban on slavery, fearing an insurrection. Meanwhile, in 1829, Spain would launch a final attempt to reconquer their former colony, landing at the port of Tampico. There, they would be decisively defeated by the Mexican forces under Santa Anna, winning him national fame. As a result of the Spanish incursion, Mexico's second president, Guerrero, had been granted emergency powers to respond to the threat, though at its conclusion, he would be hesitant to relinquish them. In 1830, Vice President Anastasio Bustamante, under the pretext of opposing Guerrero's emergency powers, launched a coup, forcing Guerrero to abandon the capital to oppose the insurgents in the countryside. By February, Bustamante's rebellion had triumphed, becoming the third president of Mexico. Bustamante's administration would attempt to centralize the government while taking strong measures against the Texan settlers. In 1828, a military force under Mexican General Mieri Terán had been sent north to observe the situation and hopefully ease the tension. His subsequent recommendations would see the establishment of Mexican garrisons at Anahuac in Galveston Bay, Velasco at the mouth of the Brazos River, and Fort Terran on the Neches River below Nacogdoches. Though Bustamante's reign would be short, as Santa Anna would launch a Federalist rebellion in 1832, the revolt would prove decisive, ousting Bustamante with 3 months remaining on the term. At Anahuac, Mexican Colonel Juan Bradburn would begin to strictly enforce the newly passed Mexican laws, arresting several men for questioning, disturbance, or conspiracy. As a result, many of the settlers were outraged. The further arrest of Texan lawyer William B. Travis would be the tipping point. Hearing the news, and emboldened by Santa Anna's civil war, a contingent of men would elect Frank Johnson as their commander before marching from Brazoria to besiege Anahuac, adopting the Turtle Bayou Resolutions, announcing support for the Federalist cause and aligning with Santa Anna. Meanwhile, a second force under John Austin would attack the small fort Velasco, which would surrender the following day. providing the rebels with cannons which they intended to use on Anahuac. With news of the insurrection and the siege of Bradburn's force, Colonel Piedra, stationed at Nacogdoches roughly 200 miles to the north, would set out on June 19th with roughly 100 men, sending ahead a delegation to negotiate a resolution to the conflict. On June 28th, the Texans and Piedras would agree to terms, including the release of all civilian prisoners and the resignation of Bradburn. Following their victories, the Texan settlers would send several delegations to speak with the Mexican government, hoping to get the 1828 immigration and slave reforms revoked, while also proposing separate statehood. Though it would all fall on deaf ears, as Mexico would once again descend into chaos. The following victory of Santa Anna in the Civil War would re-establish elections for early the next year, in which Santa Anna would be elected president on January 19, 1833, re-establishing a federalist government. Though months later, the Mexican National Congress would again try to centralize the nation, resulting in further chaos. By the end of the year, Santa Anna would back the centralist movement, revoking the Constitution of 1824 and working to consolidate power. As a result, in various parts of the country, Federalists would revolt. Santa Anna would quickly work to form an army. Departing to quell the rebels in Zacatecas, the subsequent battle would prove a decisive victory for Santa Anna, who would allow his troops to plunder the region extensively. Meanwhile, in Texas, the Mexican forces at Anahuac would arrest several merchants. When news spread to San Felipe, Travis would quickly form a militia company. Commandeering a ship and a cannon at Harrisburg, he would then sail for Anahuac, where he would secure the release of the prisoners and the surrender of the Mexican garrison. Tensions in Texas were at the apex. Many were weary of Mexican reprisals, especially after the looting Santa Anna had allowed in Zacatecas. Many also believed without a return to federalism, their autonomy would quickly evaporate, while others believed the only permanent solution to their ever-constant conflict with Mexico City was total independence. By the end of August, most towns had agreed to send delegates to discuss a coordinated response. Though before they could meet, on September 10th, a Mexican soldier would beat a resident of the town of Gonzales. The attack would spark widespread outrage in the town, leading to public protests against the Mexican authority. When news reached Mexican Colonel Domingo de Ugartechea, commander of all Mexican troops in Texas, he would fear a revolt, quickly dispatching a small 6-man force to retrieve the cannon that had been lent to the town in 1831. Upon their arrival, the Gonzales residents would vote to retain their control over the gun, escorting the soldiers out of town empty-handed. The residents of Gonzales now believed a Mexican attack was imminent. They would quickly begin dispatching messages across the state that up to 300 Mexican soldiers were expected to march on Gonzales. On September 27, 1835, 100 Mexican dragoons under the command of Lieutenant Francisco de Castañeda would depart from San Antonio de Béjar. If possible, Castañeda had been instructed to regain possession of the cannon without violence. As the Mexican troops reached the Guadalupe River near Gonzales on September 29th, they would find the ferry and all other boats had been removed. Across the river, they would be opposed by the 18 men of Gonzales's militia, who would inform the contingent that Ponton, the town's selected official, was not present. So they would have to remain on the west side of the river. With no easy way to ford the fast-moving river, Castañeda would pull his force back to establish camp. By the end of the day, the Texan militia had been reinforced, numbering 80 men and electing John Moore as captain. The next day, the Texans would continue to stall, awaiting further reinforcements. By October 1st, the militia would number roughly 150 men. Castañeda, realizing he had to ford the river, would begin to search for a crossing point. That night, camping 7 miles upstream. Though unknown to the Mexicans, that same night Moore was planning an attack. At 7 p.m., the Texan contingent would begin crossing. That night, a thick fog would settle over the river valley, delaying the Texans as they tracked the Mexican contingent. But by 3 a.m., they had reached the camp. In the darkness, the Mexicans would become alerted to the Texan presence and begin to open fire, though in the fog, they would be unable to estimate the true size of the contingent or their disposition, electing to fall back to a nearby bluff. Around 6 a.m., the Texans would emerge from the trees and begin firing on the Mexican position. Subsequently, 40 mounted dragoons would launch a counterattack, driving the Texans back to the trees before being repulsed themselves. As the fog lifted, Castañeda would request to meet with Moore, who would explain that his followers no longer recognized the government of Santa Anna. As Moore would return to his force, they would raise a homemade white banner with the words, "Come and take it," before opening fire with the cannon on the Mexican position. Realizing he was both outnumbered and outgunned, Castañeda would order his troops to fall back. Strategically, the battle would be insignificant, with only 2 Mexican soldiers killed and the only Texan casualty being from a bloody nose. Though politically, its significance was immeasurable. Texas was now in open rebellion against the Mexican state.